bin ich, am I understandable?
Sure.
Okay.
So far.
I am Michael Kutzer. I'm not Bernhard Schneider. But in a moment, I am Bernhard Schneider. Liebe Gäste, sehr verehrte Damen und Herren, ich freue mich, wieder in Cedarburg zu sein nach so langer Zeit und dass ich eine so schöne Ausstellung habe. Sorry, I see on your looks that you don't understand much German. In my lifetime, everyone in Cedarburg spoke German. Not everyone, but all people important to me. So, I'm not able to make an entire speech in English. I was not good in English. I always spoke German. What shall I do? Someone wrote a speech in English for me. So I only have to read it for you, and the only thing you have to do is to suffer from my German accent. Yeah, I have to introduce myself properly. I am Bernhard Schneider, landscape painter, who found his paradise on earth here in Cedarburg. I will go a little back in time, but don't be afraid, I will not start with my birthday in the year 1843 and with my childhood and school time in Lüneburg in northern Germany, or even with my time at the academies of Munich and Düsseldorf. All you have to know is that I, in the early 1880s, lived in the beautiful town of Dresden, exactly in the green suburb of Dresden-Blasewitz, and tried to make my living as a landscape painter. Oh, landscapes. If I had painted soldiers and battle scenes like my friend Heine, I could have gotten the one or other commission. And there was also an undercover market for nude paintings. But I never was interested in figures and in portraits. I wanted to paint landscapes. The green trees and grass, a cloud mirroring in a pond, a crisp morning mood, or the night with moonshine. Landscaping is like poetry. Many people don't get it. And those who get it don't pay for it. At least I had the disadvantage, I liked big paintings. And they didn't fit in their apartments, they thought. So I had not a very good life in Dresden-Blasewitz. I sat out there in the summer tortured by mosquitoes. I sat in the winter and froze my toes off. And I earned nothing than an amount of creditors. That was a situation when my friend Heine came like an angel from heaven to me and said, "Will you come with me to America?" I said, "What, America?" "Yeah," he said, "I go to Milwaukee. We will there paint the biggest paintings ever painted. You can paint life-size trees and bushes." I was really stunned. What a chance. Of course I didn't say no. There were some reasons. I could paint big landscapes, I would have a monthly salary, and I would have a huge gap between me and these bloodsuckers of creditors. But with the last I was wrong. The creditors sent their demands over the ocean to Milwaukee, merciless. But my friend Heine helped me again. He didn't pay the entire salary to me, always took something aside and sent it to Dresden to these bloodsuckers. And after a few years, no demands came anymore over the ocean. I was a free man again. But yeah, until it came to that, there was a hard way to go, as first we had to ship to America. I had heard of seasickness, and I was afraid of it, but I had no idea how it is like. Can you imagine how it is for a starving artist when he gets offered the most wonderful food, delicious ham and lobster and strawberries and cream, and you can't eat anything as your stomach is upset? And my friend Heine stood beside me and said, that doesn't hurt. You need such a big belly for working on the scaffolds. That's good when you lose a little weight. When we came to New York, I swore I never will set my foot on a boat again. And that is the reason why I, after a while, didn't go back as many of my colleagues did. I remained in America. The start was not very comfortable in Milwaukee. Our other boss, Heine, was the one, August Lohr was the other. He had brought his family with him and he rented a villa, had a garden, and yeah, was fine. The others sat all together in a boarding house. I had only one room and I always thought it was the shabbiest one of them. And there was Heine, and then there was Michalowski and Rohrbeck, who couldn't stand each other. And tensions and fightings was the last I wanted. Milwaukee was a little bit different from today that time. The houses had all human proportions, not such big projects like the City Hall later. And the streets often had no pavement at that time, and electrification just began. We had our petrol lamps. And you didn't need a long time to come from downtown to the outskirts. So this was a little different from now. But only after a week we had to leave Milwaukee again. Heine, August Lohr, and me to Chattanooga. We had to make sketches there for our first big painting, which should be the Battle of Missionary Ridge. And this is laying at Chattanooga. I didn't like this trip at all. It was so hot there. And we had to go up hills to have a good view on the battlefield. And so I had to climb and sweat. When I finally reached the top where I should work, I was already done. Yeah, you know, Heine was an athletic guy, and Lohr was skinny, but I had my weight and had to carry it up. Yeah, and there I sat the entire day under an umbrella and tried to catch the colors and the character of this area where 2,000 years ago the cannons had roared, shrapnels exploded, and people had shot each other dead. And there in Chattanooga I met my first enemy in America. There came this sporty red-haired guy in a way that you must see. He is very important. That was businessman William Wehner. He couldn't like me from the first moment. He said to Heine, "Why have you taken this guy, for heaven's sake, to your crew? He is too fat," he said bluntly. "He can't work on the scaffolds." I was really offended, and I thought, I will show him. Yeah, working on the scaffolds really is not easy. You have perhaps seen this model inside. It looks very tiny and neat, but in original, you know, these paintings are 50 feet high. And you have a scaffold, and on several levels there were built little studios where we could paint. And when you had to paint sky, you were sometimes 45 feet above the ground. From below, it doesn't look very impressive. But have you ever been 45 feet high and have looked down? Have you seen how small people become from this distance? And these cabins, these studios, they had no walls and no solid railing. Another problem was when you let fall by accident a brush or something, you had to climb down and up again. And you always only saw this little part you painted on. You didn't see what your neighbor did, who was perhaps on the other scaffold a little farther away, and how it would fit together. And so you had to climb down. You couldn't go back. This would be deadly. You had to climb down and then go to the platform in the middle of the studio, climb up there, look, so it is. And then you climb down there again, climbed up to your studio. But other studios I heard had one man on this platform, and he said the artists what to improve, what to change, and so on, as he saw it from far much better. So he stands there and shouted his commands. But Heine was never a noisy man, he didn't like that. And so we had to climb ourselves up and down. But beside the case that I once fell down from the scaffold, fortunately not from the top, I survived. We had really a wonderful life. It was very interesting, also for my stomach, breakfast table, and we had a lot of fine things, ham and asparagus and grapes. And also in the evening we often had a drink or more, and music. Sometimes we made it ourselves. Heine played flute very good. And I remember one evening we fetched an entire band of black musicians from the street, and they played the entire night. It was great. Dancing? We had no wives. Lohr was the only one. He had come with his wife, 2 daughters and a maid. But Heine had left his family in Germany until the conditions were clear. And we others, we all were bachelors. But that should change after a while. I never will forget the day when Michalowski was panicking in the studio as he got a letter from his bride. She was on the way over the ocean to meet him. He hadn't told her to do so. And all the others said, "When you are a man, you send her back immediately." I thought she must be a strong woman, that she dared to go over the ocean all for herself. And so it was. When she came, she was not shy at all. And she knew how to handle our crew. She stuck together with Lohr's wife, and after a few days, no one talked about sending her back anymore. The next was Franz Rohrbeck. Just grumpy Franz, I never had thought it. He married the maid of August Lohr. And so he had to hire a new maid. And soon our youngest, George Peter, he fell in love with his maid. But that didn't go well. She was from noble origin and had this wonderful name, Alwine von Lürzer-Zehenthal. Can you marry such one? It came to nothing, and I guess he never told his later wife about this affair. Yeah, the first years were splendid. We painted our regular times, and then we went in the tavern, sometimes until the morning. I don't know how often I swore the next day I would never touch a mug of beer again. It was just until the evening. there came more and more painters as we had so much work to do. The first panorama was a great success and we had to make a copy, and the same happened with the next panorama, the Battle of Atlanta. And so there was a lot to do. I had my special problems as a landscape painter. It was, of course, a wonderful experience to paint these huge trees and the bushes and plains and sky and so on. But then, later, my fine painted landscape was covered with soldiers. First we had a 1:10 version. It looked pretty good. But when it was blown up, the distance between the figures became too big. And Heine threw hundreds and hundreds of soldiers on this painting. And when I once dared to protest, he said, "This is about battle and not landscape." Oh. After a while, our situation changed. William Wiener realized that battlefield panoramas came up everywhere in America. They were not only the big studios of Philippe Otto, the French guy in New York. Just in the neighborhood in Chicago was a big company from Reeves and Gross, and they painted faster and were cheaper. They could be cheaper as they had not these high-educated painters as we had. All the painters of the American Panorama Company were well-educated from academies. And he made copies. That was much faster. While we needed half a year from the first sketches to finishing, this company threw all 90 days an entire panorama on the market. So this was a big concurrence. And so one day Wiener decided, battlefield is no more good. We become religious. We now paint Jerusalem and the crucifixion. Now I had to paint oriental landscapes I never had seen. To become used to it, I sat there in Milwaukee in my studio and painted a moonshine landscape at the Nile. Looking at the Milwaukee River didn't help much. I needed my imagination. There was a great help that we had our colleague Frosch, Lohr and Heine had brought from a trip to Germany. And he had a lot of photos as he had been with the panorama painter Pickelhain in Palestine and had made there a lot of photos we could use. The problem was Pickelhain had used his photos too, and so there were some similarities in our paintings. And there came up the rumor we were cheap cheaters and made only a copy of his painting. I can't remember that I copied anything. I only was bored by always painting desert and rocks, rocks and desert. But yeah, so it was. Yeah, I said the photos of Frosch helped much, and as we are now at photos, there broke out a real epidemic of photography in 1887. The start, it began with our colleague Breitwieser. He was half a professional. He made an invention how to exchange paper rolls inside the camera. And he infected all the others. And they bought cameras. We had money enough, really good cameras. And they made photos of all things. Children in the neighborhood, geese, themselves. Heine once had great success with a photo showing horses making love. It was a bestseller. And then they didn't want to wait until the photographers, the professional ones, developed their negatives. So they did it themselves. They bought the chemicals And they talked the entire day from morning to evening about these chemicals and how to have the right light and whatsoever. And I felt so silly as I had no interest in photography and I was an outsider. But one day that changed. George Peter bought a very expensive new camera and he offered me his old one for a very reasonable price, and I thought, oh, give it a try. And then it had happened. I was addicted too. When I look back, it was not bad that I had learned to make photos. I could use them very good for my landscaping. As when you make a photo, you have just this moment in the light you like, and later you can at home, without mosquitoes, paint this entire thing. Of course you have it only black and white, but the colors I had anyway in my mind. So this was a good thing, this photography. Heine once criticized me and said my paintings were blurred. Yeah, he had his own interpretation of art. For him, a painting had to start with an exact drawing. So he had learned it in Weimar. But I had learned in Düsseldorf at the very, very famous landscape painter Andreas Achenbach. Andreas Achenbach and his brother Oskar were called worldwide the A and O of landscape painting. And he said, Andreas, the mood is the most important part of a painting. And so I had a little different view on these things than my friend Heine did. Of course, I had heard in Munich also of the plein air painters of Barbizon, and later we also were aware that there were some people called impressionists. But I always thought their kind of painting is fitting more to the southern parts of the world, but not to Wisconsin. And they were French anyway. Yeah, back to the panorama business. First, we had great success with our crucifixion panorama. We had to copy it twice. But then the downfall began. Wiener wasn't able to sell this last copy, and he lost his interest in the panorama business. He had in the meantime other things in mind. Growing wine in California and having a horse ranch in Texas. He was a businessman. Wiener had negotiated with the leaders that the panorama building should belong to them after the third painted panorama. That was done. But he was very special. He made his negotiations mostly with Lohr, who as an Austrian was taking things not so serious. And there was nothing written, and Wiener always came again and said, no, that's not true, it's the other way. He was a master of intrigue. When Heine and Lohr went to Germany, he tried to turn us up against them. I don't know all the details, but one was clear. In the last time, he tried to squeeze as much money out of this business as he could. And he threatened us to throw us all out of America when he heard that Heine and Lohr had tried to sell this last copy on their own. There was no new commission, there was no salary anymore. We had lost our job, and we were on our own again. Everyone found a different solution. Some of the painters went home to Germany again. Heine founded a studio in the Iron Block in Milwaukee, and he had an art school there, but even if this art school went fine, he had nevertheless to do a lot of other works beside, as business cards and souvenirs and so on. Others painted theater decorations and had other little jobs. At the best was Michalowski, as he was a portrait painter, and he had commissions until Chicago. He had no sorrow at all. Law was the only one who still believed in the future of panorama painting, and so he persuaded Peter and Rohrbeck and me to paint another panorama. It should be Jerusalem on the day of Palm Sunday. This was planned before all went down, and Heine and Frosch, who in the meantime was in Germany again, had made already the composition, so it was easy to start this. But it was a dead child. This panorama never sold, and we were as poor as we were before. There were too many artists in Milwaukee. That sounds like a lot. Your art guild has more artists than that were at that time in Milwaukee. But the rich people didn't buy any art of Milwaukee artists. They went to Germany, where they had also business to do, and then they bought their art there. Therefore we have so much good German art in the MAM today. And the famous Leighton, he donated a gallery to Milwaukee. But no Milwaukee artist never was shown in his holy halls. When I complained to Heine about this situation, he said, yeah, go home to Germany. Oh, I wouldn't do that. Going on a boat again, being 14 days seasick again, only to meet my old creditors? No. I fell ill, severely. I couldn't anymore go around the block. I was weak. And I had also lost all my intention to paint. In this situation, I met in a restaurant Mr. Friedman. And he said, oh, you don't look good. You should go to Cedarburg. He had here also to do with this Hilgen Spring Park. And he said, go there. That's the only chance you have. And it was really good advice, a life-saving advice. I went to Cedarburg, and this was the difference to Milwaukee. No street noise, no stinky black river, no stench of tanneries, only green and quiet, and milk and eggs as much as I wanted. People spoke German, and I knew this was my place. I went back to Milwaukee for a while, then I went to Cedarburg again for some weeks, back again, forth, and one day I moved for good here to Cedarburg. I found the Bauer family. They had a cafe, and they were not just friendly, they understood my needs, and they honored me as an artist. Mr. Bauer was a landscape architect, and so he loved nature as I did, and we understood each other. When they built a new house, they included 2 rooms for me. A studio with north light, ideal, and a living room. This was fantastic. In the morning, I went out and made sketches or photos, and then I came home and painted, and Mrs. Bauer looked that I didn't starve, and in the afternoon I either painted at home or outside, and in the evening I had my mug of beer and my cigar. It was wonderful. There was only one shadow in this life. Cedarburgers didn't buy so much paintings that I could pay my rent and boarding. I will not accuse them. I liked big and they liked little. That was a problem. And when my debts had amounted to $900, I came really in a bad mood. And the Bauers must have realized that. I will never forget this moment when Mr. Bauer took me aside and said, "Bernhard, what do you think about paying your rent and boarding by paintings?" Oh, that was heaven. Paintings I had enough. So I could live totally debt-free. It was paradise. But every paradise has a tree of temptation. And this temptation came in the shape of a young, pretty girl. She pretended to be my student. And I liked when she made some copies while I painted and told her stories of my life. But after a while I had this strange feeling she wasn't interested so much in my stories. And the bachelor in me became alarmed. She followed me everywhere. And sometimes I remember I sat without light in my room, as I knew as soon as there showed up a light, she would be there and talk with me. I was sick of that. And one day I said to her bluntly, "Do you know, a relationship between us, I nearly 60, and you such a young girl, that doesn't work." Her reaction was terrible. She took my petrol lamp and inflamed the painting which just stood on the easel. I couldn't move, I couldn't even shout. And then she rammed the frame over my neck and went. I never saw her again. I got to know that she had become crazy and came into an institution for the rest of her life. May she rest in peace. Later, Mrs. Bauer said to me, "Do you know, perhaps you would not have become crazy if you had married her." I said that was the last thing I would have done. And now I don't know. Did she become crazy as I didn't love her? Or did she love me as she was crazy? It was tragic anyway. Now I will finish my story. It becomes dark, I can't really read here anymore. My time here on Earth is limited and I want to see my paintings once more. It is wonderful to see some of them united again, and I thank all who worked hard to bring this exhibition together. It was nice to be here in Cedarburg again, even if you don't speak German anymore. I am touched that you remembered me, and that is one reason more that I'll praise Cedarburg and his hospitality forever.